Hello everyone, welcome to another video in my Python for Beginners tutorial series. In this lesson, we'll be looking at object-oriented programming with classes and objects. We won't go into the theory and details of OOP, but instead stick to the very high-level basics to get you started. OOP is an extensive topic in itself, and I don't want to confuse you with all the details before you've mastered everything we have seen thus far. OOP helps organize and design better code. The basic premise we'll be working with are objects. An object is composed of properties and behaviors. So we have an object, properties, behaviors. Properties are basically information or data about the object, while behaviors are things that the object can do. In code, properties are basically variables, while behaviors are functions. Let's say we are creating a game. Our game is going to have a player which we can represent as an object. So if we were to create a player object, it might look something like this. Our player object will have some properties which will basically be their health, their name if the game allows you to give your player a name, and maybe some ammo. Of course it can have lots more, but for this example we'll just stick to these three. So this is the data for the player, right? The player health might be 100, player might have some name, and ammo, they'll probably have some ammo for if they have a gun or a bow and arrow or something. And then the behaviors may be walk, jump, run, shoot, etc. So those become the things that the player can do. Similarly, if we were to take a racing game, our car object might have a few properties like top speed, current speed, acceleration, and a few behaviors like accelerate, which just means going forward, reverse, and turning left or right. So these would be our objects with their relevant behaviors and properties. But how does this look in code? To create an object in Python, we first need to create a class. Our class just tells Python what our objects look and behave like. It's essentially a blueprint to the Python language for our object. Just like a blueprint for a house tells the builder or contractor what the house will look like. Using the class, Python will create our objects. Let's see this in code. We'll create a class for our player that we have here. Okay. So to create a class, we first type in class and then our class name. In this case, I'll just call it player. And you'll see Python indents the code for us. So whatever is indented by, in this case, 4 spaces, will belong to this class. So now we'll have our properties. So we have one for health, and we have another for name, and finally ammo. Now, I mentioned earlier that these were variables, so we need to give these some value. Let's say health is 100, name is Frank, just a random name, and ammo is 50. And let's give it some behaviors. So I'll say def, walk, and for simplicity, I'll just print walking. For our walk function, run, print running, def jump, print jumping. Now something to note, just like the variables in our class are called properties, the functions in our class are called methods. They are just like normal functions in Python, but it's just a technicality. So when functions don't appear in a class, they are called functions. When they do appear in a class, they are referred to as methods. And these variables become properties of the class or object. So we have our class here. Now I'll create an object from this class. So I'll just say player1 equals player. So that's the name of our class, and open close parentheses. This creates an object of the type player based on the rules we specified here. So let's say I wanted to see the player's health, name, and ammo. So I'll just do print player 1, so that's the name I gave to my object, dot health, player 1 dot name, and player 1 dot mo. Cool. So if I save and run this file now, you see we get 100 franc and 50 for our health, name, and mo. Now let's try running one of these methods. So I'll just say player 1 dot walk, and this will basically execute or run the walk method in the player 1 object. So if I run my script now, we actually get an error. It says player.walk takes 0 positional arguments, but 1 was given. Essentially what this means is this walk method is receiving an argument, but we don't really have any parameters here. Now why is this happening? Well, in the case of classes, all of our methods actually receive an argument by default, and this argument is actually a reference to the object itself. I don't want to get too complicated, but the gist of it is you need to have at least one parameter here, right? You can use whatever name you like for the parameter. I can call it ASDF if I like, but the convention is to use the word self. There we go. And self is basically a reference to the object that is created. So in this case, player 1, whatever object is created for player 1, self is going to refer to that. So now if I run my script again, we get walking, and I can also do player 1 dot run, player 1 dot jump. You can see we get walking, running, and jumping. Cool. What if I wanted to access these variables inside of my class? Well, I can just say self dot health, and this will basically print the health property. What I'm going to do is create another method here that says def show data, and once again we need to provide at least one parameter by default for the object, and I'll say print self.health, print self.name, print self.mo. And if I call player1.showData, we get 100 franc and 50 from here. So whenever you are referencing the properties of a class, you need to use the keyword self. If you remove this, run the file, you see we get an error. Now, what if I wanted to provide a value to this method? How can I do that? Let's say we have another method here, def change name, that basically just changes the name parameter to something that we provide. Well, what we do is we add another parameter to our method. So I'll just say n for name, and we can use that inside the method. When calling the method, we'll just do player1.changeName, and inside parentheses whatever name we wish to change to. So let's say Sam, and if I run this, you see we get nothing. That's because I'm not printing anything out. So I'll just say player1.showData, and let's do a before and after. Data, show data, and I'll just create some space here as well. Separator essentially. We have an error, so I forgot to change this. I'll make this self again, and there we go. We get 100 franc 50 for the first show data. Then we change the name, and then we have our second show data, which prints 100 Sam 50. So that's how you can pass in extra arguments to your methods. So we have one object here, player1. I can create as many objects as I like. So if my game had like a second player, I can do player2 equals player. And now player1 and player2 are two separate objects. I can change properties of player1 and it's not going to affect player2. So let's change the name for player1 to Sam, and let's change player1's health to, let's say, 120, and let's leave player2 with its default values. So if I run my code now, see, nothing happens. Once again, I forgot to display player2.show data, player1.show data. I run my code, and there we go. Player1 we have 120, Sam 50. Player2 we have 100, Frank, and 50. So these two are separate objects, and changing properties for one does not really affect the other. That's all for this lesson on classes and objects. To recap, an object is composed of properties, which are variables, and behaviors, which are functions or methods. You create an object in Python by first defining a class and then creating instances of the class. So we create our class using the class keyword, give it a name, we have our properties and our methods. Ensure to have a default parameter, usually called self, in your methods. And then we create our objects by basically calling the class and assigning it to a variable. After we've created our object, we can use its properties, change them, print them, whatever we like, and we can create as many instances of our class as we like. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching and happy coding.